once again, Calvin and I are going to do a bit of a deep dive. For those of you who don't know, starting last year, Calvin ended up uncovering something like, what was it, 60 plus major vulnerabilities across 25 security plugins. And it would have been 150 plugin, or it would have been 150 vulnerabilities across 50 plugins if he had just decided to go with the top 50 instead of the top 25. We're going to take a look at kind of one in particular that was quite hilarious here. Obviously, we've blurred some of these details out to protect the innocent or the not so innocent. But this is the 20 back and forth emails between Calvin and this particular security team. So this is a security plugin built specifically to protect your website, to protect your authentication, particularly two-factor authentication. And not only is this a company that makes a lot of WordPress plugins, this is also a company that hosts a lot of WordPress websites. So again, we're not going to say exactly who this is, but you're going to be able to go and figure out pretty easily if you want to. You can go and look at change logs. You can go and look at, download counts for these plugins, and you can sort of also look at version numbers, and you can figure out who this is. All of these things were 100% responsibly disclosed. Not only were they responsibly disclosed, they were responsibly disclosed again and again and again.
And we provided the fixes.
And so, so why don't you take it from here, Calvin? Again, we won't be looking at the very specific details of you emailing them back and forth and going, no, this is even worse than the last one. But maybe, yeah. So these are, in the long run, I think all of these security vulnerabilities, we will potentially be making them fully publicly available. But again, to keep people safe, some of these things still haven't even been patched months later. And for better or for worse, the biggest problem, one of the most persistent problems that we see across all of these things is not just that these things happen at security plugin companies or hosting companies, but that they happen and then they don't actually disclose the severity of what it is that happened. Or as we'll see in this case, they end up making even more comically ridiculous mistakes when trying to fix things. So we're just going to focus in on the three main vulnerabilities that this particular plugin had, all related to 2FA, correct?
Correct, because my entire research was, otherwise I could have spent years probably on this. It was strictly limited to looking for vulnerabilities in two-factor authentication and related to IP spoofing. So I limited my research to those two categories, and also like roughly 1 or 2 hours per plugin. Otherwise, like I would literally still be doing these.
Right.
And yet, to add to what Patrick said, like all of those vulnerabilities have been disclosed responsibly and privately like months ago, some even like a year ago, probably. So at least 6 months for all of them. And we provided full fixes to the vendors. We assisted them in fixing the vulnerabilities.
Sadly, only like one out of these nearly 30 different companies and plugins acknowledged you publicly. I think it was 1 or 2, out of...
There was like 1 or 2 companies that acknowledged it publicly, and like one company that like even awarded a bug bounty or something. Yeah,
right. Most people said, thanks, don't tell anybody, and they snuck it into their change log as beefed up security or improvement.
Which is like partly why we're doing this, because it's not the fact that there are vulnerabilities, like everybody can make mistakes, but like the entire thing, how everything went down, like the disclosure, like the entire process, how they responded, how long they took to fix vulnerabilities, even though we provided full working patches. Like it's just, in my opinion, just not okay. And like it has to be talked about in some way.
Yeah.
So let's jump right in. Oh, I got to zoom in here. So the first one, we are starting at version 3.3.0 of the plugin. I won't go into all the details of the vulnerability, but what happened is that if your site has any sort of read SQL injection, which there are many, like literally if you go on the PatchStack database or WP Scan, they are popping up new ones like literally every week. And if you've had one of those read SQL vulnerabilities, for those of you that don't know, it basically allows an attacker to read data from your database.
Yep.
At will, like not modify, but read.
Yep.
And in combination with this plugin, this could have been elevated to completely compromise the entire site, like log in as administrator without having credentials.
Not just 2FA credentials, but no credentials at all, correct?
Correct. And attacker can compromise any site using the plugin's 2FA functionality, logging in as any user with two-factor authentication configured.
Yeah. And so this is a reoccurring theme across these 60, 70 different vulnerabilities, is that the addition of these two-factor authentication plugins actually made the sites less secure.
Correct.
They made it less secure. Because if they're able to compromise the 2FA plugin, you don't need any of the factors. It's basically all of these plugins were basically like zero-factor authentication plugins, yeah?
At least under the condition that you had like a read SQL injection. But
Correct.
then again, and this is what many vendors like confronted us with, so basically that backslash was it, but well, you need to have compromised the database in some way, or you need to have like a read SQL injection in order for this to be valid. But then again, like if your threat model does not assume that your primary credentials can be compromised in any way, like why do you even use 2FA? Like just don't use it. If you think it's never going to be compromised in any way, like why do you need it? That doesn't make any sense to me.
If the database is totally secure, why are you hashing the passwords?
Correct.
Like, why hash them? You don't need to hash them. It's secure, you know? And it's like, it's one of the most common, this is the thing that people need to understand. This is one of the most common types of vulnerabilities that exists in WordPress. It happens in core, it happens in WooCommerce, it happens in a lot of cases, like the elementary one, it wasn't just read SQL, it was write SQL, which is even worse. But it is, I mean, just looking on here, WP scan, unauthenticated SQL injection, 6,500 instances of that. If we narrowed that down, there's probably hundreds of them just in the last year, you know? I mean, if WordPress has been around, you know, they've been doing this type of deep research for 10, 12 years. You got 500 a year. So every day on average of the history of the life of WordPress, there's been a read SQL injection of one type or another.
Yeah, so basically it is a problem. Like you also wouldn't go ahead and like store, I don't know, credit cards or other personal information in the database with the assumption that, well, nobody's ever going to be able to read that. Like, that's just not a valid like excuse, right?
Yeah.
Anyway,
okay. So you report it to them and you say, hey, here's the problem. And then they say, okay, great. Don't scroll around too much. Otherwise, I'm going to have to do a bunch of editing.
I'm sorry, just so people see, like we provided like fully featured like fixes to them. Like
you gave them the code to fix their own shit.
We gave them the code to fix stuff. Yeah.
So then they released 3.2.1. Yeah. Or 3.3.1.
Correct. So what they did here, instead, they like, I don't know how they got to that conclusion, but they thought, okay, the bad thing is we are storing the 2FA secrets as plain text in a database. And it's bad because an attacker can read from the database.
Right.
What they then did is instead of storing them in the database, they literally wrote the secrets to files stored in the WP uploads directory. And virtually every WordPress server, every WordPress host is configured to serve files in that directory if you simply access them by URL. So they were writing the secrets in plain text to a text file in the uploads directory. And you could literally just go and visit that site, that URL. I won't show it here, but you could visit that URL and download the 2FA secrets for every single user on that site. So this was their proposed fix, like as if we, I don't know,
as if having a world readable text file. Just it's basically like instead of we've got a read SQL injection problem. Now what we'll do is we'll make it a 10 out of 10. We'll just put it into a world readable text file. And now anybody can access these things and they don't need a read SQL injection. Yeah.
Again, nothing. And as if like we didn't like send back 20 messages back and forth, like discussing this. And this was the solution basically.
Yep.
Well, anyway, I tell them, guys, this is even worse. They released the next version. Now, this one.
3.32.
Now they revert back to store them in the database again. And they also encrypt it. But what they do is they use a hard-coded encryption key for every plugin. So basically, if I install the plugin on my site, I can go and look at the source code, look at the encryption key, or you can go on the repo on wp.org, and you can see the encryption key. And I can use the encryption key on my site to decrypt secrets on your site if I'm trying to attack you, basically. So they use a hard-coded, like this is just like is a sign that like fundamentals are missing here. Like
right, non-existent,
fundamental, right? And you have to remember that this is all while we are like extremely helpful and trying to help them to get this right. Like maybe Patrick can speak from the way people report vulnerabilities to gridpane.com, like receiving a vulnerability report this detailed, not even including fixes, let them completely out of the window. But like this is not the regular. This is completely extraordinary.
No, and the fact that it just went from, okay, this is bad, and it took like a month. I think it was something like a month from the point that you contacted them for them to go, we fixed it. And then you message them back and go, no, that's way worse. That's way worse what you did there, because now people don't even need read SQL access. So then they go, I got a great idea. We'll put it back into the database and we'll hard code an encryption key that's human readable right over here. So if you still had a read SQL injection issue where you started in all of this, you're basically just one additional step removed from being able to fully exploit this site as though there were no authentication mechanisms whatsoever. And this is a plugin that over 70,000 sites use. And this is a plugin created by a managed WordPress hosting company that's widely regarded as like one of the most prolific plugin developers in the entire space. And this is their posture towards.
And then it was fixed in like basically needed 3 versions to fix this.
Yeah.
And let's now look at like how they reported it to you, or basically to their users. So you can literally see it. I took a screenshot of it. The first version, the 3.3.1, is the version that first, like the first version, they fixed the issue where you could take over the entire site. After that, you can only bypass 2FA having a read SQL injection. So here they fixed the total site takeover if you have read SQL injection. And the changelog version is enhance 2FA security improvements.
Right.
And
not
like, this is just also, not right.
Correct me if I'm wrong, because this is important. Correct me if I'm wrong. At no point, and this happened with a bunch of them, at no point did they tell people to reset their 2FA secrets, correct?
No. Not to the best of my knowledge, no.
Yeah. So let's unpack that one for 1 second. Okay. What that means is if I hacked your site in the past, when any of these, like any hacked version was available, they've fixed it, but I could still have your 2FA secrets from before, and they told no one to reset those.
So this is maybe like as an analogy, for example, if all your passwords are stored as plain text in a database.
Yes. And let's say it doesn't matter what they are, no matter how secure they are, I own them now.
I can somehow read from your database and I can download all of your passwords. And then you go later and you find out that like, oh, these were stored in plain text, but all you do is hash them and store them now hashed. But the underlying password is still the same. So I still have all the passwords. You have to reset every single password as well.
Yep.
And the fact that they didn't tell anybody, it's like, well, how do you know that if you were using this plugin, maybe
aren't exploited.
You were hacked at some point, and maybe somebody still has access to all your 2FA secret keys. Maybe not. Like, who knows? Like, it would just like be the responsible thing to reset them preemptively. Just be sure.
And also, even with the fix now, so you have to have the first factor, which is username, email, password. Okay. We've talked about this too. Like, what do we think the average length of a WordPress password is? So if I've had a read SQL injection on your site, so I could read your database, and I've got 6 months to just let it run on good consumer hardware that anybody can buy for $1,000 or whatever, how many of your passwords of your first factors have I hacked in that amount of time? And also, you never reset your second factor. So it's like, how many of these 70,000 sites could still be completely breached by something that was quote unquote fixed in October of last year?
So, and then if you move on,
so they fixed 3.3.1, they go to 3.3.2.
They fixed the 3.3.2. Now we are at the
file system, right?
At the file system, right? Yep. And then we are back at the don't store them in the file system, right? And we are back at the enhance. So it's an enhancement. I dislike this because to me, if I would know better as a user, and maybe I'm not technical, I'm not very well versed in security or whatever, like I would read this, maybe I don't read it at all, the changelog. Maybe I read it and I see enhance.
Yep.
Well, I might as well wait. Like it's Friday, I can wait until Monday or whatever, right?
Right. Or again, it's like, well, how can you make 2FA more secure than it already is? Like, I'm not going to reset my 2FA secrets. Good thing, because they're not going to tell you to. Yeah. So I think we can probably wrap this one up. I mean, again, the short version of this is just one example of literally dozens wherein
basically the same story.
Yeah,
a small variation of this story.
Yeah. Well, this is just the funniest one, in my opinion, because number one, because it's a hosting company, and number two, because of the way that they just fell over themselves again and again and again. And you're trying to alert them in the middle of the night, like, no, you've made this far, far worse, and they're like, okay, I got another idea.
Also, it's not like that we pressured them or like made them rush to provide a solution. Like if you look here, like the timestamps, these are like months, weeks between them.
Yeah, right. You immediately alerted them to the fact that the September 21 fix is not a fix. It's actually way worse. And then a week later, they're like, oh, okay, we fixed that, And then
we reported that to them on September 7th.
Yeah.
So they had 2 weeks, and within 2 weeks, like with us providing the entire solution, they came up with
that fix.
With that fix, yeah.
And then a week after anybody could access these things, even without a read SQL injection, then they push in another thing that's just still as susceptible to a read SQL injection. And then they get another.
And the last one where they use like the upgrade from 0.2 to 0.3 is like almost a month. Yeah. This is the one where they then removed the hard-coded encryption key. They took a month to do this.
Yeah, and this is a security plugin in a managed WordPress hosting company. So, all right, so we'll wrap this one up for now. Unfortunately, or fortunately, we only have about 30 more of these that are not quite as comical as this one, but still there's some of them where we're going to be looking at these where it's millions of sites that were impacted potentially, and things that just should never have ever been true for super well-respected security companies, not just plugin companies, but security authorities that we see this exact same thing. So I appreciate your time as always, Calvin. Sure. Well, I'll try and get this one edited and put together as quickly as possible. Any last thoughts on this one?
No, I think we pretty much wrapped that up.
Yep. Okay. Sounds good, man. I will, I'll talk to you tomorrow. We'll do another one tomorrow. So cheers, man.
See you, man. Bye.